What if there was a moment in history when the entire world was covered in water, and only one family knew it was coming? When most people hear about Noah's flood, they imagine a large wooden ark, pairs of animals, and rain falling for days. But the Bible describes something far bigger and more serious than that. It tells the story of a world filled with corruption, a coming judgment, and one family chosen to survive and begin again. So what really happened during the flood, and what does it mean? To understand the flood, we need to go back to the beginning of the story in Genesis. After the creation of the world and the first humans, Adam and Eve, the population began to grow. But as people multiplied, something changed. Genesis 6:5 says, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." This is a strong statement. It suggests that violence and corruption had spread deeply into human society. The Bible continues in Genesis 6:11, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence." This gives us a picture of a world that had moved far away from its original purpose. But in the middle of this, one person stands out. Genesis 6:9 says, "Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God." This is where the story shifts. God decides to act, but he also makes a plan to preserve life. In Genesis 6:13-14, God tells Noah, "I am going to put an end to all people, so make yourself an ark of cypress wood." This ark would not be a small boat. The Bible gives detailed measurements. Genesis 6:15 describes it as 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. That's roughly the size of a large ship. Noah is then given another instruction. He is told to bring animals into the ark. Genesis 6:19 says, "You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you." In Genesis 7:2, it also mentions that some animals were brought in greater numbers, especially those considered clean. This part of the story is often remembered visually, animals entering the ark 2 by 2, but it also represents something important: the preservation of life. At this point, Noah begins building the ark. The Bible does not describe how long it took, but it suggests that this was a major task. During this time, Noah is acting on faith. There is no mention of rain yet. In fact, earlier in Genesis, it suggests that the earth was watered differently. So building a massive ark would have seemed unusual, even confusing to others. Then the moment comes. Genesis 7:11 says, "On that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened." This is important. The flood did not come only from rain. It came from above and below, from the sky and from the earth. This creates a picture of overwhelming water covering the land. Genesis 7:12 continues, "And rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights." But the flooding did not stop after 40 days. The waters continued to rise. Genesis 7:19 says, "They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered." According to the text, the flood was total. Everything outside the ark was affected. Inside the ark, Noah, his family, and the animals were safe. Genesis 7:16 says, "Then the Lord shut him in." This small detail carries meaning. It shows that God was not only giving instructions, but also protecting those inside. The floodwaters remained for a long time. Genesis 7:24 says, "The waters flooded the earth for 150 days." This means the story unfolds over months, not just days. It is not a quick event, but a long period of waiting. Then something changes. Genesis 8:1 says, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark." The word "remembered" here does not mean God forgot. It means he turned his attention toward them to act. A wind begins to blow and the waters start to recede. Gradually, the ark comes to rest. Genesis 8:4 says, "It settled on the mountains of Ararat." The waters continue to go down, and Noah begins to test the conditions outside. He first sends out a raven, and then a dove. Genesis 8:11 describes how the dove returns with a freshly plucked olive leaf. This small detail becomes a powerful symbol, showing that life is returning. Eventually the ground becomes dry. God tells Noah it is time to leave the ark. Genesis 8:16 says, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives." After everything that has happened, Noah's first recorded action is not to build a home or gather food. He builds an altar. Genesis 8:20 says, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord." This moment shows gratitude and recognition. Then comes one of the most important parts of the story. God makes a promise. In Genesis 9:11, he says, "Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood." This is known as a covenant, an agreement. And as a sign of this promise, God sets the rainbow in the sky. Genesis 9:13 says, "I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant." At this point, the flood story comes to an end, but its meaning continues. Many people ask whether the flood was global or local. Different interpretations exist. Some understand it as a worldwide event, while others see it as a large regional flood described in universal language. What remains consistent across interpretations is the message the story is trying to convey. At its core, the flood is about justice and mercy. It shows a world that had become deeply broken, and a response that was both serious and purposeful. But it also shows preservation. Noah and his family represent a new beginning. Another key idea is obedience. Noah follows instructions even when they are difficult to understand. Hebrews 11:7 reflects on this, saying, "By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family." His actions are based on trust, not immediate evidence. There is also a theme of renewal. After the flood, the world is described as starting again. The command given to Noah in Genesis 9:1 is similar to what was given to Adam earlier. Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the earth. This connects the story back to the beginning, as if the cycle is restarting. For many readers, the flood also raises deeper questions. Why would such a drastic event be necessary? The Bible does not answer every detail, but it emphasizes the seriousness of human choices and their consequences. At the same time, it highlights that judgment is not the final word. The story moves from destruction to promise. Over time, the story of Noah's flood has been remembered in different cultures and traditions. Variations of flood stories appear in ancient texts from the Middle East, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh. While these stories differ, they show that the idea of a great flood has been part of human memory for a long time. The biblical account stands out for its focus on moral meaning and covenant. So when we ask what really happened during Noah's flood, the answer is more than just rising water and a large ark. It is a story about a turning point, a moment when the world changed, when one family was preserved, and when a promise was made about the future. And maybe that is why the story has lasted so long, not just because of the scale of the event, but because of what it represents. It reminds us that actions have consequences, that faith can lead through uncertainty, and that even after destruction, there can be a new beginning. In the end, the image of the ark floating on endless water is not just about survival. It is about trust in the middle of uncertainty. And the rainbow that follows is not just a sign in the sky. It is a reminder of a promise, one that points forward, even after the storm has passed.